Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much to Rabbi Eric and Rabbi Jenny for inviting me to share a bit about my summer in Israel. It truly was a transformative experience, both personally and professionally. So everything I'm going to talk about today comes back to the experience of connection. So whenever we're talking about a word, the best thing to do is go to the dictionary. So the dictionary definition of connection suggests a logical relation, an association, a relationship in fact, or a relation of personal intimacy, just to name a few. Connection is one of my favorite things about Judaism. I once heard someone say, "You'll never find a Jewish hermit," and I think that's mostly true. So much of our text, our liturgy, and our practice is centered on how we connect with each other, with our families, with our friends and neighbors, even with strangers. This sense of connection is what has strengthened and sustained the Jewish people throughout history. Many of you in this room know, although some may not, that I am a Jew by choice. When my husband Rich and I moved to Raleigh as a young married couple, and I'm not saying how many years ago, we were welcomed into this community in a multitude of ways by many, many people. The most significant were the connections that we first made with other young couples with whom we shared holiday meals, celebrated the birth of children, and who explained to me why I would finally end up with so many sets of dishes. Connection to people, connection to Jewish community, I totally get. I was blessed to make lifelong connections in Rabbi Jenny's first adult bat mitzvah class. Then I completed my conversion and began teaching in the religious school. Amy Rips put me in a classroom teaching text to 4th and 5th graders. That class was perfect for me. Connection to text and connection to Jewish learning, check, I got it. But as I took on more responsibility in the religious school, my lack of connection to Israel always bothered me. Historically, liturgically, spiritually, Israel, the land and the state, as well as the people, is central to Judaism. Other teachers could talk about their birthright trips, bar and bat mitzvah celebrations at the wall, living on a kibbutz. That mostly from my husband all the time, talking about living on a kibbutz. I always felt like a fraud standing in front of a group of students saying, "When you go to Israel," or "In Israel, many people do this," et cetera, et cetera. What did I know? I had no connection. Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies is an adult learning community based in Jerusalem. Their mission is to provide an open, inclusive, diverse, and intellectually challenging environment which engages all Jews in the study of classic texts and ideas of their heritage. They offer a very intense experience of Jewish life and tradition. I applied and was accepted into their second cohort of the Senior Educator Learning Fellowship. Note that senior refers to my role here in my community, not age. 18 of us began our year-long fellowship with a 3-week program at Pardes in Jerusalem, and we continue to meet monthly on Zoom, both as a group and with individual mentors. I have a project to complete over the course of the year that I'll share with you some other time. Thus, the mentor and the chance to meet monthly with this group of wonderful educators from around the country truly feeds my soul. One of our first meetings this year was actually when I was at home with COVID. It was the 3rd day. I was feeling fine, and I was just mad that I was stuck in the house, but I got to see those people, and it really lifted my spirit. Pardes is a wonderful organization with a rich history and a bright future. I'll start with my favorite story, my favorite fun story. Most days we were on our own for lunch. Folks brought from their home or their apartments. We ate with friends in the food court. It's just like the United States in some ways. At the mall across the street, or we grabbed to-go dishes and met at a park to eat family style. But about once a week, we had a communal lunch for all 120 plus of the folks that were in the summer program. And at one program, the president of Pardes started his remarks by saying, "I'd like to start with this message from Rabbi Eric Solomon in Raleigh, North Carolina." And the whole end of my table started, "Cathy, isn't that your rabbi?" So I immediately sent a note saying, "Thank you, Rabbi Eric, for that. That's my rabbi moment way on the other side of the planet." We started each day with a Talmud class. Mine was titled, "What to Wear with a Meeting with God," and focused on a Mishnah from Tractate Brachot about Koved Rosh, which is like serious head or something like that. We had a lot of definitions we came up with, where the rabbis debate appropriate demeanor to bring to the Amidah. Our teacher was also a musician, so we started and ended each class with a nigun, which obviously I loved. We each took 2 afternoon classes that alternated each day. I attended a class about the writings of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks and another that focused on Rashi commentary. Both classes were wonderful, but the Rashi class was a special joy. Deep learning, great debate, and an appropriate dose of laughter. We also had weekly guest speakers. Our cohort had a special visit from the lead educator at Yad Vashem, and the other weeks I attended talks by first Yitz and then Blue Greenberg. I've seen and read their writings and just for years, and I was definitely starstruck. My daughter gets starstruck about, K-pop artists, but when they said Yitz Greenberg was in the building, I had a little heart palpitation. I also attended an optional evening class on scribal arts and learned to write stam letters on parchment with a turkey feather. The depth and breadth of what I learned this summer is impossible to convey in the time that I have today. But what I really want to share with you is not what I learned, but what I experienced. This was my first trip to Israel, and I will start by telling you that the first 24 hours there were terrible. I won't go into all the details, but between a very delayed flight, lost luggage, and my pathetic conversational Hebrew, there were lots and lots of tears of frustration in those first hours. But at 4:30 that Friday, I put on my new dress, lost luggage, thank you, and headed down to First Station where I had heard that there was live music leading into Kabbalat Shabbat. I walked into a lovely outdoor shopping area and was bombarded with the music of Kabbalat Shabbat. The area was filled with people in kippot greeting each other in Hebrew, and almost immediately someone walked up to me and said, "You're Cathy, right? We're in the Pardes cohort together." Sometimes connection is everything. My day turned around almost immediately as Mandy, Rachel, and I spent the next several hours wandering from First Station to another shul for a service led by Nava Tehillah, and then to their apartment for a delicious Shabbat dinner. That evening set the stage for the rest of my trip. Here in Raleigh, mostly due to my role at Beth Meyer, just about everything I do is in Jewish community. I attend Jewish conferences several times each year. But Israel takes Jewish community to a new level. Going into my local Super Soul on a Friday morning and realizing that everyone else there was also shopping for Shabbat, getting on a public bus and seeing the person in the next row studying Tehillim while they wait for their stop, not having to ask if there's shellfish in a particular dish at a restaurant. Wow. Mind you, that changes in Tel Aviv. Living as a Jew in Israel is a completely different experience from living as a Jew in Raleigh, North Carolina. Because of the nature of my program, I didn't really get to travel the country. We were in classes from Sunday through Thursday each week, and I had Shabbat plans every weekend. So except for a Shabbaton in the Jerusalem hills and a few days in Tel Aviv at the end of my trip, I spent the entire time in Jerusalem. But going back to my definitions of connection at the beginning, one was a relation of personal intimacy. Usually that refers to people, but you all know that feeling you get when you start to really know a new city. I loved where I lived. My apartment was a 5-minute walk to the Windmill or the King David Hotel. That actually wasn't so great when President Biden came to town. I could be at the Shuk or the Old City in 15 minutes. Everything was so close and the weather so lovely that I very rarely rode the bus, although the buses were ridiculously convenient and easy to use. By the end of my time there, I knew which corner shop sold Diet Coke and which ones only had Coke Zero. I could time my morning walk to Pardes based on when this one guy on a motorized scooter sped past me every morning, tzitzit flying behind him. There was an outdoor free library that I stopped at every few days to drop off and pick up new books to read. I even started to recognize specific neighborhood cats, one in particular who decided I was no danger and stopped running away from his napping spot on my porch when I arrived home. All the things I've been sharing with my students over the last year started finally to become personal and frankly more real. For example, each year when we switch from the prayer for rain to the prayer for dew, I talk with the students about praying for the attainable, not praying for something that might require a miracle. By these guidelines, praying for rain in summer in Israel is a wasted prayer. That always made sense to me, at least theoretically. In North Carolina, I've seen a lot of summer afternoon rainstorms. Some you might say deluge. If you've ever been in the parking lot waiting for kids to get out of the JCC, it almost always rains at that exact 20-minute time. And then I spent a month in Israel in the summer and never saw a drop of rain. Most days, not even a cloud in the sky. I have a great PowerPoint that I made for our students during COVID, teaching all about the gates of the Old City. These slides have the history of each gate, a little bit about the surrounding neighborhoods, both inside and outside the wall, that type of thing. On my second Shabbat in Jerusalem, I walked around the entire Old City, in and out of various gates, visiting locations inside and out. When I told my cohort friends about it the next morning, they basically told me I was crazy and that what I had done really could have been dangerous. It did feel a little sketchy around the Lion Gate, and I will tell you that the hill from the Dung Gate to the Zion Gate after you've already walked your 10,000 steps and you're running out of water is a real doozy. However, it was one of my favorite experiences, and now I have my own pictures to include in the slideshow. These and other experiences, like a delicious tasting tour of the Shuk, a visit to a kibbutz just outside of Jerusalem, my first glimpse of the panorama at the Tayelet Promenade, or even a ride on the high-speed rail between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, connected me to Israel, the place, in ways I never could have imagined. Here at Beth Meyer, and in most Jewish organizations that I am familiar, we talk about meeting people where they are on their Jewish path. We recognize that there are a lot of ways to be Jewish and that each path holds value. In Israel, that diversity is magnified. On a daily basis, I was with Jews from all levels of observance, from a variety of ethnic backgrounds, all manner of dress, both in and out of the Pardes community. When Yitz Greenberg spoke at Pardes, his talk advanced the idea that even more so than do unto others as you would have done unto you, Judaism's biggest contribution to humanity is the idea that we are all created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. If we live according to this precept, then we must see the inherent value of each human being, that every single person has infinite value, that each person is unique, and that we are all created equally. And that was mostly my experience during my visit. Our program ended on a Thursday. The following Friday was Rosh Chodesh. I was heading to Tel Aviv with a friend for the remaining days of my trip, but I couldn't leave Jerusalem without davening with the women of the wall. Their executive director, Anat Hoffman, visited Beth Meyer some years ago, and their work in Israel is inspirational, and unfortunately, an uphill battle. That Friday morning, about a dozen of us from Pardes gathered to join their group. I had visited the Kotel several times during my visit, and it was generally a very calm and peaceful place. But that morning, it was loud. There was an amplified service on the men's side of the Kotel, but there were also men with megaphones yelling at us in Hebrew and English. We were desecrating the Kotel. We were desecrating God's name. We were surely going to hell. And by the way, why don't you go back to America because you aren't wanted here? There were women standing around our group, shrieking in high pitches, sometimes directly in our ears, trying to disrupt the service. The temptation was to yell the tefillot just to be heard, but disrupting our kavanah was their goal, and so instead I focused on the rhythm of the service and was soon able to find joy davening with that amazing group of amazing women. At the end of the service, we left the Kotel Plaza as a group, since we were told that was actually the most dangerous part of the morning. We started walking, singing Ozi v'Zimrat Yah. A group of Masorti men were waiting at the entrance to the women's section, singing with us and cheering their support. But right after that, we had to move through a crowd of angry men yelling insults, dropping leaflets, and throwing gravel at us. There were buses with engines running to take us out of the old city quickly. Anat herself welcomed us onto the bus, and we were happy to have some time to talk about and process the experience. It's really hard to feel a connection with people who are yelling at you about your religious practice and saying you aren't a Jew. It doesn't matter if it's because you're a woman, or if it's because you're a Jew by choice, or just because you don't practice the way they do. Luckily, at that point in my trip, I had a stockpile of amazing experiences to offset that one. An hour or so later, my friend and I were on a bus to Tel Aviv. We ended that day on a pier overlooking the Mediterranean, bringing in Shabbat with Jews from all over Israel, from all around the world. As that service ended, with the entire group in a circle, singing a rousing Israeli-style Adon Olam, this connection was back, and it was stronger than ever. Before I close, let's go back to our original definitions. I would say that I now have a relationship in fact with the land and people of Israel. Parts of that relationship are complicated. But just as when you love a person, you accept their negative qualities along with the positive ones, the same goes for a place that you love. And now, finally, Israel is a place that I love. Shabbat shalom.